With the weather calming down, they could use the partially refined oil to fuel up our vessel. We explained we only had enough for a one-way trip, which further reinforced that we weren't the bad guys. They were good and convinced now that we were community builders, not crooked regime enforcers. The old rig workers started to fuel up our patrol vessel, and we did radio checks. The captured security personnel were fine. The people running the security center were fine. Everything seemed fine. We estimated that we had a few hours left before the reaction team would come to see what was going on. Unfortunately, that was the same amount of time it was going to take to fuel up our patrol vessel. We weren't leaving, though. Not yet, at least. And the time was aligning to probably be a dawn raid. We were given the tour of the rig and picked out all the defensive portions. We didn't know whether to expect a bigger ship or a little ship, but we hoped we had enough, big enough rounds to stop it before it could get to us. We had a guy with 300 Win Mag and a guy with 308, so we were hoping that that would be enough. They only had about 20 rounds each of actual armor-defeating ammo, though. The rest were normal jacketed rounds. The rest of us could engage at 700 yards or so if we wanted, but unless someone was walking on deck, we weren't going to be doing much. We counted on our large caliber friends to do the heavy stop. We didn't have a 20 mil. We didn't have a 20 millimeter anywhere, even a 50 cal, unfortunately. Guess that would have been too easy. We tried to push the coulda, woulda, shouldas out of our mind. The patrol boat itself had a 30 cal on it, which would be great to come to bear, but it would be too easy of a target out in front. We would be much higher up in different layers. The sun wouldn't be much of assistance because regardless of which direction they came from, it would affect both of us similarly. We were pretty sure the bad guys would be coming from the north, and unfortunately our patrol boat was docked on the east side. We couldn't move it anyway because that's where it needed to get fueled. There was this nagging suspicion in my head, though, that they weren't going to come in one ship. Maybe they would take 3 ships and 3 times as many people with them, seeing their strategic importance and having the extra time to prepare. If it could buy enough time, maybe we could get our patrol vessel in play enough to hold out a bit. Chapter 13, Incoming Preparations, Pre-Dawn, Day 2. We had a combat engineer with us, so that had come up with the idea to make the rig more defensible, so we spent the last hour before dawn putting up steel barricades. They weren't so big that they would turn the rig into a huge sailboat and topple it over, but were big enough for a person to hide behind and set up a rifle on. The steel barriers made it safer for everyone to be out on the rig anyway, with random winds kicking up to 40 miles an hour. It'd be cold for sure, but at least it'd be out of the salt spray below. It was sprinkling, but not raining too hard. There was a concern that the opposing force would see us welding, but we were hoping they wouldn't notice any different than other work going on that they wouldn't understand. Right around then, as everyone welded and prepared in the dark, we got internal comms. We're getting hailed on the secure freaks. Bad guys successfully did a long distance check. We're expecting visual within the hour. Copy. Our CO got on the comms. Copy, we'll be ready. Out. We all looked around and nodded and filled in the rig workers. They said to expect visual, but it was pretty dark still. The sun was starting to creep up, but was still a ways away. I imagine in the daylight and enemy arrival were scheduled right around the same time. The workers went back to what they were doing in the relative safety of inside the complex. Our defensive points were angled away from the main building. Our guys on the patrol ship were instructed to wait until they got closer to conserve ammo, depending on what kind of ships we were up against. Unfortunately, our ship wasn't even pointed in the right direction to optimally use our bow turret, so they'd have to wait until nearly a 90-degree pass by. It'd be a nasty surprise if they came around that side, though. Chapter 14, Boats Incoming, Dawn, Day 2. I heard seagulls and looked up. Stupid annoying things, I thought. What are they doing here? It's like they have some kind of sixth sense when something's going to happen. Then I heard it before I could see it. No, I didn't hear it so much as I felt it. Something nagging at the end of my conscience. We all went radio silence without even thinking about it. Any comms we used from here on out would get picked up by the baddies in seconds if they were running a frequency scanner. Everyone pretty much felt the oncoming craft from there on out within a few seconds. It was like the ambience was being disturbed by something. Our CO went inside with a general, "You all know what to do," remark as if this was normal. We all chose spots, 2 people per barrier on the 3 different levels, several barriers per level with our sharpshooters on top, one on either side of the rig with a buddy. The precision riflemen would try to take out the enemy's engines if they could, if not, the captains and controls. If the enemy was stupid enough to get on deck with their own riflemen, that became the priority for the buddy teammate. As soon as they got within 500 meters, we could all open up. Each rifleman had a spotter as well, as the workers had loaned out extra binoculars for the task. It was sure convenient. Right as the sun crested the water, we could see the shadows moving towards us. I sat there resting my knees up against the barrier in the drizzle, and I saw a big blobby shadow, then realized it was 3 shadows. I then realized there were shadows behind those shadows, maybe 5 shadows, 7 shadows. It wasn't that we had a lack of ammo, it's that they were moving fast enough to where we wouldn't be able to stop them all. They weren't quite human-shaped to me yet, just shadow-sized blobs. And that's when the first 2 rang out from above me. It would have been really loud, but my headset compensated and didn't let the worst of the noise in. I could tell those were the big rifles, but not to the point of killing my head with pain. The blobs spread out further and started to become distinct shapes. 2 more shots rang out. I started to see smoke coming from one of the ships, but it wasn't stopping. I could hear something hitting the water below us like heavy water droplets. They were shooting at us but falling quite short. We needed to wait for them to come in about 100 more meters and then open up when we could actually see human shapes. None of us had our rifles up yet. We were simply watching. Maybe if they thought there was only 2 deck workers or something, they would underestimate. They kept coming. 6 vessels or 7 in a wedge shape, and a command vessel behind them. These guys weren't idiotic pirates. They had some semblance of training and preparation. Even if we took out a couple boats in the front, they knew they could do this in one push. The enemy knew the importance of this rig, and they weren't letting it go voluntarily. They had spent all night prepping their team for one huge push to secure this rig once and for all, and even probably staff it for themselves if they had to. I imagined them radioing security, screaming at them to take care of the shooters so they could board. Then I imagined our security transplants coming up with some silly story about there only being 2 sharpshooters, but them being pinned down. Only 2 shooters to take care of. Everyone hoped the enemy would take the bait and get in range to take the initial fatal hits without scouting. The blobs kept coming and starting to be more distinctly shaped. I saw my friends bringing their rifles on target, figuring we were right around 600 meters now to contact. Close enough for us to barely engage but not have a decent kill zone yet. The enemy could easily scoot back out of range at this point if they had to, without taking significant losses. Thankfully, I had my new optic with the optional 4x magnifier that I could snap into place. I looked through it and could easily make out each of the ships. My optic had notches up to 600 meters, and this would be a whole different story than the last time. The optic realized that I wanted to look through it and auto-adjusted its light accordingly so I could see the different ranges appropriately. I couldn't get a bead on the operations ship, but I could see some rafts buzzing towards us quite distinctly. They were all aiming high, too high, trying to get our marksmen. They had no idea we were here. We had a chance. And they were now within range. We designated to start firing. I slowed my breath and exhaled. I took a shot. My first shot with these new earmuffs protecting my ears. I barely heard the shot and heard more recoil spring boinging back and then forward. That started our ambush as I heard about 8 other shots as well, then 2 bigger ones in a single volley. Some of them sounded like heavier intermediate cartridges, and I imagine those were the 7.62x39 rounds. I guess a few of the guys must have had some fairly spendy AKs, I thought amusingly. I had recalled seeing a Raz-74 and a Mutant earlier, and I reminded myself to ask them to shoot it for a few rounds later if everything went well. If you spend enough money in training on an AK, they were every bit as accurate and reached out several hundred extra meters. I heard some shots come back and they all fell short, but we're getting closer. I didn't like it. I looked for where they were coming from, and pretty much everyone was standing up now trying to fire at us. We needed to maintain fire superiority, and basically all at once we all mag dumped on them, one raft at a piece. The guys with the AKs ran out before us and changed their mags out and resumed fire, just in time for us to change ours out. It was a good rate of fire, and within about 20 seconds of that, we'd achieved fire superiority.